Are you confused about the role rote learning should play in your learning life? Some people swear by it. Others who use memory techniques worry about falling back on rote despite having better tools for learning. They even get dramatic about this worry, calling rote repetition drill and kill. So when some people swear by it and others run from it like little scared cats, what gives? And how specifically is learning by this deadly form of repetition defined? We'll get into everything about rote learning in this video so that you can make an informed decision about how to learn based on science, not opinion and not fear. Let's get started. Hey there, this is Dr. Anthony Metivier from MagneticMemoryMethod.com. I'm devoted to helping you make the switch from boring and tedious repetition to exciting and vibrant learning experiences. So if you're new here, get subscribed, hit that thumbs up, and for the love of memory, let me give you the free course that has freed thousands of people around the world from tedious repetition. After, of course, we define rote learning, which at its core is repeated exposure to information you want to learn without thinking about what you're repeating. It is almost the direct opposite of what scientists call active recall, a technique that engages all the senses. And I'll give you a detailed example of how to conduct multisensory active recall at the end of this video. You'll see people who get caught in a rut of lifeless repetition that drains them of the excitement that I have for learning when they flip through flashcards in a mindless way or use spaced repetition software by mentally repeating the same information again and again and again without deeply engaging in it. And you may have engaged in some of those behaviors yourself. Well, what makes the behaviors rote is literally going through the repetitions without any further level of engagement beyond repetition. And according to Carla Hannaford in a great book called Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All in Your Head, part of the success of the drug Ritalin is easily explained. It helps students put up with the tedious nature of repeating information without any kind of multisensory engagement. And that's very sad. In other words, there are societies operating today that prefer drugging children instead of tackling the real problem of making learning fun. And it's a tough problem to solve. I fail at it every single day, but I still do my best. But is repetition itself bad? Absolutely not. For example, you can repeat prayers and engage deeply in their meaning. I've done this myself with Sanskrit text drawn from the Ribhu Gita for years. Each time I practice is deeply rewarding. In fact, it gets better and better the more I repeat the same material. Ameva hi triptatma, ameva hi nirguna, anandam paramammanamidam drishyam na kinchana. I also repeated my TEDx talk several times for practice giving the speech. This is a great example of when rote repetition makes sense. Finally, it's really important to repeat songs if you want to commit lyrics to memory. Repetition is also a huge part of ear training, and general instrumentation is a form of rehearsal musicians sometimes call dedicated practice. So rote repetition can be good for music, it can be good for ear training. The examples of rote learning that give it a bad name include things like spelling drills, multiplication tables, cramming for exams, mentally repeating names, dates, or facts, flashcards for learning foreign languages, using apps again and again and again and again and again without any fun or anything interesting that you're doing in your brain. And because these forms of repetition are quite brutal in how that they create boredom, I.C. McManus and Peter Richards have called any memory gains that they do create incidental learning. In each case, there are alternatives. For example, you can use the peg word method to assign a dynamic shape or figure to each letter of the alphabet. This simple set of associations makes learning spelling much more fun and interesting. When it comes to the multiplication tables, you can combine something like the major system with rhyming or story and the method of loci to make learning the entire set engaging and immersive. In language learning, Dr. Richard Atkinson has shown just how poorly rote learning works in comparison to the mnemonic strategies shared on this channel. Rote repetition is normally a source of frustration. It doesn't work well because the lack of multisensory engagement with personalized points of reference fails to stimulate enough of the brain. And here's something interesting. In experiments that have been successfully repeated by scientists around the world, Atkinson demonstrated that rote learners were successfully able to recall vocabulary from lists at a rate of 28%. By contrast, those who used techniques like the Memory Palace showed a retention rate of 88% or better. And Dr. David Reeser and Tyson Yunkaporta recently showed even better results by incorporating some Aboriginal memory techniques into a follow-up experiment. So what would you prefer? Sticking with rote learning and recalling only around 28% of what you learned correctly? Or do you prefer what more meaningful learning and comprehension techniques offer? Let me know in the comments what you prefer. Now, you might be wondering why these success rates matter so much. After all, it sounds like it really only comes down to time spent. Looking only through the lens of time, you might conclude that if you only get 28% correct, all you have to do is go back and spend more time on the material. Not so. You're also learning out on critical thinking benefits by doubling down on rote memorization. As Linda Jacobson has shown in her book, Innovation with Chinese Characteristics, High-Tech Research in China, societies that grow up with rote recall tend to have poor critical thinking skills. Although it's common for children to learn Chinese characters by rote, this learning practice has been shown to stunt their thinking abilities. And this is tragic because problem solving requires the ability to mentally rotate information through multiple angles. The absence of rote repetition in other cultures may be one reason why places like parts of Europe and the United States thrive by promoting individualism and freedom. Historically, a learning technique called ars combinatoria was much more prevalent. This approach promoted a form of learning, sometimes called inner writing, a means of creative repetition that relies upon deep and meaningful engagement for the learner. Meaningful learning might include tactics like guided discovery, sensory learning, physical engagement with learning materials, such as through mind mapping or working with a memory wheel. It might include social experiences, combining writing with speaking, combining listening with speaking, such as through debate, and developing highly personalized learning plans. So, are there any benefits of rote learning? Well, so far, pretty much a lot of what I've said makes rote learning look pretty bad. But we've also already seen that rote practice is a must in areas like learning music, giving speeches, and spiritual goals. So when used in the correct context, rote can help learners achieve incredible goals. Playing a musical instrument is just one example. But rote learning reduces critical thinking when required of children, and there may be some contexts where it can be helpful for certain types of adults. So for example, in Polly Tan's research, she suggested that adults who grew up as rote learners might still benefit from it when they are adults later. And other research has shown that individualized learning plans can themselves fall into rote that has not benefited students in places like Sweden. But at the end of the day, each individual has to decide what is right for them and cultivate radical honesty. Sometimes engaging in rote learning gives you the benefit that you're engaged in some kind of activity. It can feel like it's benefiting you. But if the activity of what some people call overlearning doesn't actually lead to accomplishment, then the benefit of doing something for the sake of doing something is an illusion. So what are the disadvantages of rote learning? Well, there are many disadvantages, most of which are easily avoided. First, rote learning does not ask you to think about what you're learning. It's focused entirely on repetition itself. This focus not only makes it boring, but you lose out on the benefits of thinking that you could receive by engaging with the information in a deeper way. And line rote learning also treats the brain like a linear library. You miss the benefits of what I often call the rhizomatic effect that you can experience when using a Memory Palace network to produce new knowledge based on information because you've engaged with what you memorized deeply. And your mind is not a library. Avoid treating your memory in a linear fashion. You also lose tons of time that you could have been spent enjoying using your mind and imagination because you use the alternatives to rote learning. Finally, rote repetition prevents you from experiencing the benefits of having memorable conversations with others because you have thought about what it was that you learned. So, is rote learning effective? To a certain extent, yes. And in some areas, rote rehearsal is absolutely necessary, including when you're using memory techniques. However, repetition should always be creative repetition. and a simple way to reduce the amount of repetition needed and always ensure that you deeply immerse yourself in what you're learning is to use cave cogs, or what we call the magnetic modes in the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass. To take a simple example of how I learned something very quickly with a minimum of repetition, let me refer to my Sanskrit meditation project. In learning a word pronounced like tesham, which means unto them or for those, I didn't repeat it over and over again. No, no, and 1,000 times no. Instead, I looked at the TES part of the word and imagined Nikola Tesla driving a Tesla over a Christmas ham. He did it for those who are always devoted to reality itself, which is the main meaning of the entire line I was learning. It's a simple but engaging mnemonic image, like a Tesla driving over a ham, that makes memorizing a word fast, easy, and less likely to need rote repetition. Then I went through cave cogs to drive home the sound and meaning. Kinesthetic, feeling myself driving the car as if I were Tesla. Auditory, hearing the sound of the engine roaring. Visual, imagining what the scene looked like. Now, I don't really see pictures in my mind, but I always just say, what would it look like if I could see images in my mind? And that works pretty good. Emotional, I just experience Tesla's intention to help the devoted. Then there's conceptual, reflecting on the meaning of the text and who Tesla was. Olfactory, smelling the ham. Gustatory, tasting the ham. And spatial, thinking about the size of the car and the ham. And by engaging deeply with the word in this way, I learned it immediately and never forgot it after one pass. I've memorized more Sanskrit than I ever thought possible using these techniques. The same techniques I learned to use when memorizing the names of all my students within minutes when I was a professor. The same techniques that I used to learn German fast enough so that I could give lectures to those students when I was a professor. So if you're sick of boring, old, and uninteresting methods of rote memorization, why not give my free course a try at magneticmarymethod.com/YT. It will connect you with an ancient memory tradition that helps you learn new things fast, and all without the tedium of unhelpful and barely successful repetition. Get it now at magneticmarymethod.com/YT. Memory techniques are scientifically proven, and they are indescribably fun. I hope some of my passion for them rubs off on you. All you have to do is get started. So, with thanks as ever to our channel members who make this mission possible, and to everyone who has the Magnetic Memory Method Masterclass or any of my books or spent time with me in a strategy session, you make this possible too. Everyone on Team Magnetic appreciates it. So what do you say? Are you ready to rev the engine of your mind and get some real learning done for a change? Let me know in the comments below, and until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.